Most people think innovation comes in small steps. A better battery, a faster motor,
A sleeker design.
tiny upgrades, safe upgrades. Nothing that really shocks you. But every once in a while, something shows up that isn't an improvement. It's an interruption. Something so big, so unexpected, that your brain struggles to process the scale. And when Maxwell Chikumbutso rolled this machine out of his workshop, even seasoned engineers forgot how to speak for a second, because what sat in front of them wasn't just a bus.
It was a statement. Long.
Unnaturally long. The kind of long that makes you squint and think your eyes are playing tricks on you. At first glance, it looked normal. The front cabin, clean, modern, electric. Nothing special. Then your eyes kept moving. And moving. And moving. Row after row after row. More windows. More body. More structure. It didn't stop where a bus normally stops. It kept going like someone hit copy and paste on the design. People standing nearby instinctively stepped backward just to fit it into view. Phones came out. Heads tilted. Someone laughed nervously. Because when something breaks your expectations that badly, your brain treats it like a visual illusion. It looked less like public transport, and more like a train that forgot it needed tracks. And the strangest part? It wasn't built for show. It wasn't some exhibition model. It wasn't a parade gimmick. It was designed to work.
Daily.
Practical. Functional. Which is exactly what makes it crazy. Because Maxwell didn't ask the normal question. How do we make buses slightly better? He asked something far more dangerous. What if one bus could replace 5? That single question changes everything. Think about cities for a second. Traffic. Congestion. Hundreds of small buses. Hundreds of drivers. Hundreds of fuel stops. Hundreds of maintenance cycles. What if you could compress all of that into one self-powered, ultra-capacity machine? Fewer vehicles. Less energy waste. Less chaos. More efficiency. Suddenly bigger isn't excessive. It's logical. But logic doesn't prepare you for the first time you see it move. Because when the motor activated, there was no roar. No diesel cough. No smoke cloud. Just silence. A machine this size, moving like a whisper. That alone felt wrong. Your brain expects something heavy to sound heavy. But this thing glided forward like it weighed nothing.
Smooth.
Effortless. Like friction didn't apply. Engineers watched the telemetry screens, waiting for massive power spikes, waiting for huge energy drain. Because physics says something this big should be hungry. It should devour energy. But the numbers didn't match the theory. Consumption stayed stable. Suspiciously stable. That's when people remembered something important. This wasn't just a big bus. It was Maxwell's bus. Which meant one thing. It wasn't designed like anything else on the road. Hidden inside wasn't a traditional system. No oversized battery bricks. No brute force solution. Instead, it carried the same philosophy he used in everything else. Energy isn't something you store. It's something you constantly create. Every wheel rotation, every brake cycle, every vibration.
Captured.
Recycled. Fed back. So instead of draining faster because of its size, the vehicle was sustaining itself while moving. The longer it rolled, the more balanced the system became. Like it found its own rhythm with the road. And that's when the real implications started sinking in. Because if one vehicle can carry the load of 5 and power itself while doing it, then entire fleets become unnecessary. Costs collapse. Fuel disappears. Charging stations become irrelevant. Cities get quieter,
Cleaner.
simpler. And suddenly this crazy long bus doesn't look crazy anymore. It looks inevitable, like something that should have existed years ago. And Maxwell? He just stood there calmly, like this was obvious. Like everyone else was late to the idea. Then he did something even more unexpected. He opened the doors and told everyone to step inside. Because from the outside, it looked massive. But from the inside, it felt like something else entirely. Something closer to a moving building than a vehicle. And that's when people realized this wasn't just about transportation anymore. It was about redesigning how entire cities move, and what they saw inside made the project even harder to believe. Because stepping inside wasn't like entering a bus. It was like entering a microcity on wheels. Rows of seats stretched farther than anyone thought possible, yet the interior didn't feel cramped. Spacious aisles, multi-level seating platforms, ergonomic design. Maxwell had thought of every detail. Screens on every corner displaying real-time energy metrics, climate control that adjusted automatically based on passengers, and subtle lighting that made the cabin feel calm and futuristic. Even the floors weren't ordinary. Every step harvested kinetic energy, feeding it back into the system. Passengers could move, stretch, even walk from the front to the back, without feeling the weight of the bus dragging them down. Engineers whispered. Journalists gasped. Investors stared, silently calculating what this meant. And then came the control center. Not just a driver's seat, but a cockpit straight out of a sci-fi film. Multiple touchscreens, energy flow maps, autonomous navigation indicators, all perfectly integrated into a seamless interface. One person could pilot the bus, but the system could also operate autonomously, monitoring traffic, adjusting speed, and balancing energy consumption across every subsystem. Every wheel, every motor, every panel talked to each other, like a single organism moving in perfect harmony. Then Maxwell did the impossible. He hit the acceleration. The bus moved forward. Silently.
Smoothly.
Effortlessly. And despite its record-breaking length, there was no swaying. No awkward turns. No excessive lean. It handled like a well-tuned sports car, yet carried the capacity of what would have normally been 5 buses. The realization hit hard. This vehicle didn't just move people. It moved ideas. It challenged everything urban planners had believed about mass transit. It forced engineers to rethink physics. It demanded cities reconsider infrastructure. And outside the cabin, the world stared. A vehicle this long, moving this smoothly, generating its own energy, seemed impossible. Yet it was real. And the next test made it even more staggering. Maxwell rolled the bus into a full city simulation. Hundreds of people, simulated traffic, intersections, energy loads. The bus navigated seamlessly. It didn't just survive the chaos, it optimized it. Energy recovered at every stop, every turn, every acceleration. By the time it completed the loop, it had regained more energy than it used. And that's when everyone understood the silent bombshell Maxwell had just dropped. This wasn't a bus. It was a blueprint for the future of cities. Transportation, energy, urban planning.
Everything was about to change.
And Maxwell, as always, was already sketching the next evolution. The news didn't spread immediately. There were no flashing headlines, no viral videos overnight. Just whispers. Engineers talking to other engineers. City planners sending cautious emails. Investors quietly checking flight patterns and energy metrics. Because once people realized what they were looking at, the implications hit like a freight train. One bus replacing 5 or 10 conventional buses. One bus generating its own energy. One bus reducing congestion, pollution, and infrastructure strain. Entire urban layouts that had been designed around stops, charging stations, fuel deliveries, and parking? Obsolete. Entire budgets, millions of dollars allocated annually for energy, maintenance, and vehicle replacement? Potentially wasted. And yet it wasn't theoretical anymore. It was tangible. It was moving silently down the streets, reclaiming lost space, carrying more passengers comfortably, and feeding energy back into the city grid as it rolled. City officials started taking notice. Engineers who had been skeptical a week ago suddenly wanted demonstrations. Journalists began asking hard questions. How is this possible? Where does the energy come from? Can it scale? And Maxwell, calm as ever, just answered with one line. We didn't invent anything new. We just refused to accept limits. That philosophy rippled through every meeting, every discussion, every boardroom and city hall. Because if one bus could do this, then fleets of buses could transform entire metropolitan areas. Energy grids could be decentralized. Traffic patterns could be redesigned. Air quality could improve drastically without building a single new station. And the most shocking realization? It wasn't just about buses. The same principles applied to trucks, delivery vehicles, emergency response units, even trains. The logistics of entire nations suddenly had a new variable: self-sustaining vehicles. Economists began calculating potential savings. Environmentalists imagined cities without exhaust clouds. Urban planners sketched streets where fewer lanes were needed. Even ordinary citizens started to imagine the impossible: a future where commuting didn't cost a fortune, where energy bills shrank, where moving people and goods didn't drain the planet. And while all this speculation swirled, Maxwell kept building. Because he knew the first bus was just the beginning. The second bus was longer. The third could interface with road infrastructure to share energy with other vehicles. The fourth was autonomous, capable of coordinating entire fleets seamlessly. And each time he revealed the next prototype, the whispers grew louder, the disbelief stronger, and the realization clearer. Maxwell wasn't just innovating transportation. He was quietly rewriting the rules of energy, logistics, and urban life, one record-breaking vehicle at a time. But the world wasn't ready. Not yet. And that's exactly why Maxwell's work was so dangerous. Because once the concept spreads, once the systems scale, there's no going back. Energy dependence, congestion, fossil fuels, charging stations, all obsolete concepts, suddenly fragile. And as the first fleet of self-sustaining buses began quietly rolling out in controlled cities, the ripple effect began. Word started to leak. Not through press conferences. Not through flashy launches. Through glimpses. Drones capturing footage. Engineers sharing internal images. A few lucky journalists getting behind-the-scenes access. And the reaction was immediate. Global transport companies froze. Boards convened in panic. Executives ran calculations nobody had ever considered. If one of these buses replaces a fleet of 20, one CEO muttered. If it generates its own power, another added, voice tight with disbelief. The math didn't lie. It couldn't. Factories producing buses, maintenance depots, fuel suppliers, charging networks, every single layer of traditional transport infrastructure suddenly looked vulnerable. News outlets tried to sensationalize it. Headlines screamed about the impossible bus and Zimbabwean inventor breaks global transit norms. Yet the footage was unassuming. A silent, sleek bus gliding down ordinary streets. Passengers boarding. Doors opening automatically. Energy flowing back into the grid. It didn't look like a revolution. It looked normal. And that made it far more dangerous. Because revolutions that look normal slip past unnoticed. While governments debated regulations, Maxwell's team quietly expanded testing. Cities that had agreed to pilot programs saw results immediately. Traffic efficiency improved dramatically. Energy consumption for city transport dropped by nearly half. Accidents decreased due to autonomous coordination. And environmental sensors reported cleaner air within weeks. Meanwhile, competitors scrambled. Some called Maxwell's work impossible. Some tried to replicate the technology. Some lobbied governments to slow it down, citing safety and infrastructure concerns. But Maxwell didn't respond to the chaos. He didn't argue, negotiate, or defend. He kept building, refining, scaling. And that's when the whispers turned into alarm. Because this wasn't just a bus anymore. It was the blueprint for a self-sustaining transportation network. A city where buses, trucks, and service vehicles no longer relied on external energy. A grid-independent urban system. And once the first network proved stable, once the first fleet ran completely autonomously, investors started asking the question nobody wanted to admit. Could this collapse entire transport industries? Engineers realized something even bigger. It wasn't just buses. Maxwell could scale this to freight vehicles, public trains, emergency services, even planes. Entire nations dependent on energy imports suddenly had an alternative. And Maxwell's lab, quiet and unassuming in Zimbabwe, became the epicenter of a global shift. He didn't just drop a bombshell. He quietly detonated it. The kind of change that doesn't just ripple, it cascades. And as governments and corporations scrambled to understand, Maxwell was already drawing the next design. Something longer, bigger,
Smarter.
something that would make the longest bus look small. Something that would redefine not just urban transport, but global energy reliance itself. Weeks later, the first public demonstration began. A city center, early morning. Empty streets. Crowds of curious onlookers. Cameras set up at every corner. And then it rolled in.
The bus.
Longer than any street had ever seen.
Sleek. Silent.
Gliding like it had no weight at all.
People gasped.
Phones recorded every second. Children pointed, mouths wide open. Drivers stopped mid-commute to watch. But the real shock came when it stopped at an intersection and let passengers board. Every seat filled easily. Multi-level seating. Wide aisles. Comfortable spaces. Energy screens flickering silently, showing real-time power levels. And yet no one plugged it in. No cable. No connection. Nothing. It powered itself. The whispers turned into murmurs. The murmurs into exclamations. "This is insane," someone yelled. "It can't be real," muttered another. And then Maxwell appeared, walking casually alongside the vehicle, gesturing for reporters to step closer. "This is the future of urban transport," he said calmly, "and it doesn't need permission from old systems to exist." The bus started moving again, and as it glided through the streets, something remarkable happened. It wasn't alone. Other buses, part of the same fleet, followed. All self-powered. All gliding silently. Coordinated. Efficient. Autonomous. Entire city blocks saw what looked like a parade of impossibility. Engineers watching from control centers realized the implications immediately. One fleet could replace hundreds of conventional vehicles. Energy use dropped drastically. Traffic efficiency improved. Air quality surged. Journalists tried to calculate the economics. Investors whispered numbers no one had dared to imagine. And as the demonstration continued, the world began to understand. This wasn't just a technological marvel. It wasn't just an engineering record. It was a blueprint for transformation. A single visionary, quietly working in Zimbabwe, had shown the world a new way to think about transportation, energy, and urban life. But even as awe spread across social media and news outlets, Maxwell was already moving forward. Sketches for longer, smarter, more efficient vehicles littered his lab tables. Ideas for autonomous freight lines, self-sustaining emergency units, and even modular city infrastructure systems were being drawn. And the world still wasn't fully ready. Corporations panicked. Energy markets trembled. Governments debated regulations. Yet the first fleet kept running, silently proving that the future Maxwell had envisioned wasn't coming. It was already here. And just like that, everything people thought they knew about transport, energy, and urban planning began to unravel. Because Maxwell Chikumbutso hadn't just built the longest bus ever. He had built a bridge to a world no one had dared to imagine. A world where energy was autonomous, cities were optimized, and transportation didn't just move people, it moved civilization forward. And as the sun set on that historic day, with the record-breaking bus gliding into the horizon, one thing became clear. The world would never be the same again. And as the bus disappeared into the horizon, carrying passengers effortlessly, energy humming invisibly beneath its wheels, one thought lingered in everyone's mind. This wasn't just a vehicle. It was proof that the impossible could exist. That a single idea, executed with vision and persistence, could rewrite entire systems. That one person's refusal to accept limits could ripple through cities, nations, and industries. And Maxwell Chikumbutso? He didn't just break records. He broke assumptions. He didn't just build a bus. He built a glimpse of the future. Silent, efficient, unstoppable. And while the world scrambled to catch up, the quiet truth remained. The future had already arrived. And it was moving faster and longer than anyone could have imagined.